Good morning, everyone. As folks enter the room, thank you so much for being here. We'll give people a minute to trickle in, get comfortable. If you're just joining, welcome. Thanks so much for spending part of your Wednesday with us. Well, I'm sure folks will keep joining as we move into the first few minutes of the hour, but we'll get started. We have a lot of exciting content for you today and don't want to miss a minute of it. So thank you all for registering for today's event and for choosing to be here with us on your Wednesday. My name is Kyler Blodgett. I'm a state and local policy analyst here with PeopleForBikes, and we appreciate you joining if you joined in the past for our monthly industry and advocacy webinars. This is, of course, our July segment, and it's all about the state and local legislative recap about the good work that's been happening in municipalities and states all across the country this springtime session. And we're here to share several of the wins that we've been involved with and that we've tracked over the course of the year so far. We have two fantastic panelists. You already met one of them. It's me. And then my wonderful coworker who you'll meet in just a moment as well, if you haven't already. I want to remind everyone, you are welcome to take notes, of course, but we will, as always, send out the recording and a copy of the slides and the many links that we'll put in the chat as well to everyone who registered after the session. We'll be together for about 45 minutes. The first 35 is presentation and the final 10 as question and answer. So make sure to use that Q&A feature in the bottom of your Zoom screen anytime throughout the call, and Ashley and I will vet and respond to the questions in the order that they come in. So don't be shy about that feature. Without further ado, as I mentioned, I am the state and local policy analyst on our team, helping to track and write testimony for lots of the policy areas that we work in, from e-bikes to recreation and access to infrastructure funding. And that work is all overseen by Ashley Seward, our fantastic director of state and local policy, who also leads our sustainability work all across the industry and across the country. And for all of the action alerts, or many of the action alerts that you're seeing, the testimony you see PeopleForBikes give, various state and local campaigns we have about ballot-based funding, Ashley and I are the dream team behind it. So we're really thrilled to be bringing our work to you all today. And we know that we've worked in partnership with many of you on the call today. So thanks for that partnership. We look forward to it continuing. All right. Today, we've done a quick welcome. We'll talk about some of the legislative wins at the State House and at city halls throughout the country. We'll then talk about some of the funding wins, both on ballots and in bills as well. We'll talk about a few of the bills. Obviously, we love supporting good causes. We also occasionally have to fight against things that would hurt access for people biking and walking safely across the country. So we'll talk about some defensive campaigns that we had. And then we'll give you our thoughts and our team's thoughts about what we're looking at in 2024 as some of the top issues and campaigns that we're seeing grow across the country this year, and some ways that PeopleForBikes has put together resources and communication strategies and campaigns to make sure that we're set up to work together. Because as great as our team is, we know that there's no way any group could do it alone, and we want to make sure that we're all working together with you all on the call and the resources and communities that you've built to make this progress spread as far as we can. And then, of course, that Q&A that I mentioned. So please do track your questions throughout. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ashley to talk about our first legislative section.
Thank you, Kyler. And I'll just highlight once more, our state and local efforts would be nothing without Kyler. So thank you so much for all of your help on our team. We wanted to kick off today with one of our most exciting campaigns that we've really enjoyed working on this past year, and that's with e-bike incentives, purchase incentives specifically. Kyler made a beautiful map here that I'd like to walk through and highlight, but I'd like to say just at the top that e-bike incentive programs are just so popular and continuously growing in their introduction within state legislatures every year. Every year it surprises me with how much they're growing in popularity, and a lot of that popularity is due to the Denver e-bike incentive program and just how viral it went across the nation due to its success. So I'll just say here, within state legislatures so far this year, there's been 16 states plus DC that have introduced bills for the adoption or renewal of e-bike incentive programs. So far this year, there's been 5 states that have adopted or renewed funding for e-bike incentive programs. I'll say for the map, the states in black or like a dark blue color are the newly passed incentives here in 2023. Light blue are past incentives from last year and previous years, and yellow are proposed incentives that have not been passed yet this year. So of those states that did pass this year, it's Colorado, Washington, Minnesota, Maine, and Vermont. I wanted to make a couple notes here on some of these states because it was quite an impressive year that we've seen for e-bike incentives. I can't underscore that enough. But Colorado is pretty much one of the leading states for the amount of funding that they're putting towards e-bike incentive programs, as well as the diversity in programs that have been introduced in past. So just wanted to highlight at the top, it's a lot of money. The program that was passed this year was a tax credit for retailers that participate in the e-bike incentive program. So there really isn't a cap to how much the state is allocating. It can be a continuously growing program and something that the state is expecting to have quite an amount of revenue to the state and benefit to riders across the state. Washington's program is $7 million that they're allocating. It's $5 million for the traditional e-bike rebates, but then $2 million for e-bike lending programs, which is unique and awesome to see at the state level. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight Vermont. Although it's not as much funding and compared to these other states, Vermont was the first state in the country to have a state level e-bike incentive program that's available to the general public. And the renewal of this funding that was passed this year, the $150K, they not only renewed funding for the current program, but they also expanded the scope of it to include purchases for used e-bikes as well as commercial e-bikes, which is the first time that I've seen that at the state level throughout the country. So lots of super exciting things happening in this space. We've been tracking this for close to 4 years now. And again, this is specifically state level. There's a whole lot going on at the local level, as I alluded to with Denver. But seeing this at the state level has truly been impressive. And because we've worked so closely in this and tracked it over the last 4 years, we've developed a toolkit of all the best practices we've learned, sample legislation that policymakers can use based off of these programs that we've seen, where we've seen success, and the language that's been used for those successful programs, and put it all in one handy toolkit for you to use. So I'll drop that in the chat so you can have it, but please reach out if you have any additional questions. So that was a super fun campaign, lots of fun stuff we work on, but I'll move over to our campaign that I'd say we're the most famous for, which is our 3-class campaign, 3-class definition campaign for electric bicycles. As of this month of this year, we're at 42 states that have adopted our model legislation for the 3-class classification framework. 49 states in total now define an e-bike as a bicycle. So if I can explain this map really quick, the green states are the states that have the 3-class system in place. The yellow states are states that don't have 3-class in place, but still have a favorable definition for e-bikes that align to traditional bicycles as opposed to a motor vehicle. And the states that passed this year that put the 3-class in place is New Mexico, Alaska, Nebraska, and West Virginia. I optimistically labeled Alaska green. It's on the governor's desk, but we are hopeful it will be signed into law soon. I don't see any hesitations with that as of yet, but we're hopeful that will be signed. The other pieces I wanted to add of the bills that have been passed this year is West Virginia in particular. West Virginia prior session or within their statute last year defined class 1 e-bikes and class 3, but did not define class 2. And that was the big push this year, was getting class 2 defined so that they are now legal to ride throughout the state. But then we got an extra cherry on top this session when policymakers decided to add a provision that will allow class 1 and class 2 access on non-motorized natural surface trails throughout the state. So that was also a pretty big win for electric mountain bike riders throughout the state and something that we were favorable towards. I will say, wrapping up this campaign in a bow, Rhode Island, unfortunately, is our last state, but also good because it's been a successful campaign. But Rhode Island is our last state that currently defines e-bikes more similar to a motor vehicle than a bicycle. We do have some plans to try and fix that next session. We worked on it this session, and unfortunately, we're just not able to get it across. But we have a lot of really wonderful advocates on the ground. If any of you are on the call today, thank you so much for your hard work. I know we'll get it, we'll get it eventually. But looking at this campaign as a whole, it's been 7 years of us doing this campaign, and it is now the nationally accepted narrative that an e-bike should be defined and regulated similarly to a traditional bicycle. So that is a major win and a very big thing that we are happy about and excited to celebrate as we're closing up this campaign. We can kick it to the next slide here. I promise I'll pass the mic over to my colleague Kyler in a second, but we just wanted to highlight a few more wins outside of the e-bike space. I know we do a lot of e-bike, but we also do tracking all across the country, including non-e-bike related issues, of course. Some of the major wins we saw, I wanted to highlight on the recreation side, the climate side, and on the safety side of things as it relates to bicycles and the bicycle industry. On the rec side, there was a really exciting bill in Florida that got passed and allocated $200 million to connect hiking and biking trails to the state's trail network. That was a major push in funding and something that we're really excited about to support the recreational bike riding space. On the climate side of things, Minnesota passed a really wonderful bill that's very similar to Colorado's greenhouse gas reduction ruling, if anybody on the call is knowledgeable about that ruling. But essentially, state agencies must track and minimize greenhouse gas emissions and include this within their transportation plans. But the cherry on top with this that really makes it connected to bikes is that in states need now to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions within their transportation plans. They have to look for alternatives within those transportation plans that support lower greenhouse gas emissions. And guess what business we're in that allows for such a thing to happen? You could probably guess it, it's bikes. So including more bike projects within transportation plans is one solution there, and something that we'll continuously engage in. But a really wonderful climate ruling that will be of benefit to bikes in the long term. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight a couple safety builds. We have a few blogs coming out that will show all of this in detail, all the issues we've been tracking this year. This is just a highlight, but there were builds in Maryland and Illinois that were favorable to safety as well. And again, we might have some folks on the call, so if you're involved in any of these builds, it's awesome. But Maryland, it was a Safe Roads Act that requires DOT to prioritize safety improvements for bike and ped infrastructure. And in Illinois, it was to establish a task force for eliminating traffic deaths and support safer infrastructure or intersection design. So lots of exciting things. The fun never stops, but just wanted to highlight a couple of these really wonderful bills that we saw get signed into law this session. With that, I will pass the mic over to my colleague, Kyler, to talk about funding.
Ashley, thanks so much. And we already mentioned Florida on the last slide. There were lots of great legislative wins across the country for safer policies and design, and lots of great new dollars, which is what help gets infrastructure on the ground, which is key to helping people feel safe riding and adopting new modes. So Minnesota, as part of a really wonderful sustainable transportation budget that the state passed, included in that is 50 million, 40 of which is for general biking and walking projects, and 10 million is for their Safe Routes to School program, which is a fantastic investment. You see further down that Hawaii matched that as well with 10 million to Safe Routes to School. Florida, as Ashley said, we just are thrilled about this. Our trails policy manager and recreation and e-mountain bike policy manager, Rachel, did a lot of work to increase that number in Florida and make sure that it's going to be implemented correctly in the coming years, so that these connectors are both for people who are looking for recreational options, hiking and biking, but know that those can be useful to people who are commuting in more rural parts of the state as well. And we think that there's a lot of great opportunity in Florida to make the most of an unprecedented investment in their outdoor recreation and mobility network. Washington, as you saw, they were one of the states that newly passed an e-bike incentive this year. It covered a small part of this, 197 million, is both for e-bike lending libraries as well as the incentive that mirrors many other states, and lots of other funding in that too. And then New Mexico as well, small, but we always love celebrating new wins in states that are beginning to invest more in their transportation network. And so we wanted to call it this win in New Mexico, which also, as Ashley mentioned, passed their 3-class law, which is going to help people avoid a patchwork of policies about cities that have adopted that law, cities that haven't. And so we think that these investments are coming at the right time, that e-bikes of all classes, class 1, 2, and 3, are being further legitimized in that state. So excited to see how the funding and the policy is paired. We also, and I'll talk about this more in a minute with our local work, we run a campaign the last 12 months a year called Vote for Bikes. Many of you are probably familiar with this. And it's where we really try to publicize ballot-based funding opportunities for bikes that voters have the chance to approve. Sometimes it's new general obligation bond measures in the form of property taxes. Sometimes it's a sales tax increase or continuation. We're seeing this all across the country, big and small. And November is a really popular date, the November 7th election, that dozens, if not hundreds, of states, cities, and counties across the country have the opportunity to pass new infrastructure funding. So there's a few state level measures that we're looking at, particularly in Texas, to either let new counties pass bonds that will raise funds locally. Counties that have historically been prohibited from doing that, if voters approve it, may get that access, as well as just a new huge chunk of money. They're looking at $1 billion right now to acquire new land for state parks and improve and maintain these parks, which we know is instrumental for getting people out riding more safely in a recreational way. So there's a few state level opportunities that we're looking at later in this year. There's lots of local ones, which you'll hear about in a moment. These are already passed from local ballots earlier in the year. Colorado Springs passed $50 million for biking and walking initiatives, mostly new infrastructure development, including $10 million for their Safe Routes to School program. Anchorage, Alaska, we couldn't be more proud of. They passed almost $5 million in trail investments and dedicating new park districts so that there's going to be fundraising bodies, which is sort of hard to do without that official designation. So some of these are new funds, some of them are just new policy changes that are gateways to more funds later. And then if you're in Massachusetts, you're probably familiar with Community Preservation Act funding. I think there's about 180 of these, mostly small townships, but sometimes also like I think Worcester is the biggest city that's passed one. So places large and small that have passed often property tax slight increases to invest in preserving both historic places as well as access to recreation. And that often looks like trails, parks, facilities, things that we know are important for bikers getting out there and enjoying natural spaces. So we'll put the Vote for Bikes link in the chat in a few minutes. But just know that we're tracking a lot coming into the fall, especially those 2 big ones that I mentioned in Texas. So we'd love your local support in amplifying those. And if there's measures that you know about that people in your community are going to be voting on to pass new funding or friendly laws for bikes through the remainder of the year, there's a form for you to send those to us so that we can help spread the word about the good work you all are doing locally. So those are some of our funding wins at the state and local level. I mentioned that part of this call, most of this call was going to be celebrating the great wins. Some of it was going to be fighting against things that we would prefer not to happen or try to amend things that would hurt the bike industry and bikers. So I'll pass it back to Ashley to talk about one of these or 2 of these issues.
Thank you, Kyler. And yeah, so many exciting things happening on the funding side. It's really wonderful to see. On the defense side of things, as you all know, we work for a trade association. So not only are we trying to push the creation of safe and connected bike infrastructure throughout the country, better bike laws, e-bike laws, all that good stuff, but we also want to make sure bike businesses are healthy and doing as well as it relates to the policy space. So there was a couple of issue areas we saw pop up this year that we engaged very closely in and were able to have some success. One that I wanted to highlight was an extended producer responsibility law that we worked on in New York. This was concerning e-bike batteries, and specifically what this law would have originally done, or this bill would have originally done as it was proposed, would have required New York bike retailers to accept 10 e-bike batteries per customer per day and bear the cost of recycling them in addition to that, regardless of the store capacity or battery quality. We, of course, had many issues with this, as they would be a burden to retailers and be a safety issue. I will drop into the chat so you all have it, but PeopleForBikes, we do have a national e-bike battery recycling program that we already run. And we're always looking for more folks to get involved. So if you're not already involved and don't know about it, please check out that link and get in contact with us. We'd like to give you more information. But we worked very closely on this bill. We were able to amend it and get it to a point where it does align more with our current e-bike battery recycling program that we already run. So it's not additional regulations upon the industry. But the bill did not make it through the state legislature, but it will be carrying over into the 2024 session. So we'll be engaging again next year. But we do like where we're able to leave the bill off as it stands right now. And it's not nearly the way it was when it was initially introduced. So that was a win for us this session for sure. Another big thing that came up this year that we'll get into the trends, but will most likely continue are right to repair bills. If you're unknowing what a right to repair bill, essentially in its intent, it's a great thing. It's just trying to make it easier for consumers to use third parties to repair consumer electronics. We believe that many of these right to repair bills, and it can be not just consumer electronics, it can also be agriculture equipment, wheelchairs, it gets in the motor vehicle space also, but the main thing with these builds is that there was a fairly strategic campaign that introduced several of these builds throughout the country. If I look at my notes here, it was 15 builds in 11 different states, all with a fairly broad umbrella right to repair push in the definition of the products that would fall within the regulations that would require manufacturers to allow this third-party use, allow additional information to be shared with third parties so additional repair could be done, was so broad that e-bikes would be included. So this was major concern to us because we believe it's a safety issue if third-party repair or consumers were to be repairing their own bicycle batteries. We did not want that happening. So we engaged very closely in this. New York did pass a bill last session for e-bike right to repair that was broad enough that it included e-bikes within the provisions. But we were able to successfully amend that out this session and get e-bikes excluded. So that was a win. But unfortunately, within the 15 builds in 11 different states, Minnesota was one of the new ones this session that the right to repair bill did make it through the state legislature with vague enough language that included e-bikes. So we'll be working on again next session to amend that out and get e-bikes clearly excluded so we do not have to abide by the requirements of that regulation. Additionally, of those other states I mentioned, there'll be carryover bills, of course. So we'll continuously be involved in this campaign. If you're a company or if you're just a policymaker on the call and you'd like some more information as to our talking points and our opinion when it relates to e-bikes and right to repair, we'd be more than happy to meet with you. So just let me know. We'll drop our contact information in the chat here, or it'll be at the end of the call, but happy to talk anytime. Okay. I think we're going to get into some other defense builds on the infrastructure side. Kyler, do you want to take it away?
I certainly do. Yeah. So there were a few different infrastructure defensive campaigns we had to make this year, but the one I really want to shine a spotlight on is what happened in Arizona. And if there's any Arizona folks on the call that were familiar with this, either deeply or wrote letters or spread the word, thank you again so much. There's these would have been a set of three really regressive and really dangerous policies, and that would have had long-term impacts for biking and walking across the state, all introduced by a single legislator, a single senator that we think was acting in response to some federal legislation that we'll just encourage state DOTs and cities to think about adding more active transportation options for folks. And this would have been a real overcorrection. The one that we were most worried about is number 3 on the list, 1697. And this would have rejected all federal funding for those types of programs, which is really, in the sense, rejecting what's almost free money for this. And something that we think makes no sense for something that's really just adding opportunities for folks who want to get around biking or walking or maybe have to choose those modes. That one, we worked in a great coalition. A huge shout out to the Coalition of Arizona Bicyclists, who were very active in this, all of their board members, many of their members. The Public Interest Resource Group of Arizona, thank you so much for everything that you did, and several other sustainable cities, sustainable transportation groups, and then industry representatives, Fox and others who are based in Arizona, who really stepped up to send letters and lean on their contacts. Uh, the other two, Senate Bill 12 and 13, are a little bit more nuanced. I think that's why they've made it longer. In the session, they passed the first chamber on narrow partisan majority and almost passed the second chamber, but thanks to a lot of the noise raised by our coalition and contacts with a diverse spread of representatives across the states, failed to pass the House at the very last minute. But these would have prevented cities and the state from setting any kind of goals around reducing vehicle miles traveled, as we're seeing other states doing as a way to curb their emissions from the transportation sector. And then 1313 was a general bill that would have prevented any city plan or project from reducing overall capacity for cars. And this is scary when you think about how far ranging that might have been. There's, of course, the obvious, no new bike lanes or things like that. There's potentially, if you want to convert an abandoned parking lot to a park or to a school, or put in a new bus lane, or put in speed bumps, or put in any sort of the far ranging things far beyond biking that we know make it safer for people, or simply make more sort of green space and amenities. This would have really potentially challenged the progress for those all across the state of Arizona, which I don't think I need to tell the group on this call why that would have been so harmful. But anyway, I was just willing to give a huge shout out again to the coalition of folks. It went all the way, several people really leaned on their contacts, and we basically secured um, a confirmation that if any of these bills made it to Governor Hobbs's desk, she would veto them. She feels quite strongly about preserving these types of opportunities, and we were able to get, have an audience with people in the highest sort of halls of power in the state, thanks to a lot of the local advocates. So again, hat off to anyone who was involved with that, big or small. And if any of these who are reminiscent of bills that you are coming up in the future legislative sessions in your state, please do let us know. We'd love to provide research, testimony, contacts, industry contacts to help fight these types of progressive policies. Okay, with that, I want to talk about a few of our top trends that we're looking at continuing into the 2024 session. And again, most of these you've already heard about, but we sourced Ashley and I racked our brain. We asked our entire policy team, what are you looking at as the biggest things that will continue into next year? And certainly you saw that map on the third or fourth slide. E-bike incentives at the state level show no sign of slowing down. And lots of those yellow states that weren't successful this year, we hope and expect they'll come back even stronger, with more sponsored, with more I think education of public officials about why these are an important option, and why it makes sense for states to encourage particularly low-income folks to be able to afford this emerging technology. We also, as you heard from Ashley just a moment ago, we think that a lot of those 15 bills around right to repair bill language, we may see some of those again in states, and we feel more prepared than ever with our arguments about why it doesn't make sense for e-bikes to be included in that list of other type of sort of consumer electronics. But we're going to continue to work with bill sponsors and sort of advocacy groups behind those right to repair bills to make sure e-bikes are not on the list of what's included. I'm sure many of you have been following the sort of saga in New York City around e-mobility certifications and battery testing requirements that are now mandatory for any e-bikes sold in New York City. We expect that other cities may follow New York's lead. I mean, New York is a bit unique. They have 65 million delivery drivers that are making very little money and being asked to meet incredibly high demands for speed and frequency of food deliveries often. And so there's sort of an interesting setting in New York City that encourages people to really rely on very cheap and low quality battery systems. So we've been working to help get a new system in place to help get those delivery workers access to higher quality bikes. And there's an exciting event happening in a few weeks in New York City around a trade-in program. But we expect that other cities and some states are also going to be looking really closely at, if they have an e-bike incentive program, if they sort of have a similar problem with low quality batteries, what type of certifications make sense that doesn't also lock people out of a job or out of the necessary transportation mode. So we're following that pretty closely. When I'm realizing these all say number one, sorry, they should be numbered sequentially. Number four on that list. Our colleague Rachel, who I mentioned a few times, has been doing great work about model language for e-mountain bike access in state parks, and is beginning input from lots of different state park land managers, as well as industry representatives to begin to introduce that, so that sort of the right level of access on natural surface trails, land managers can at least consider what the industry sees as a best practice there. And the last, number five, that I'm so excited about, we have these industry webinars every single month in August, and you have the date and time there. We don't have a Zoom link for you yet, but please do hold that time in your calendar if you're available. This will be one of the opportunities where we unveil our national infrastructure campaign, which two new fantastic infrastructure directors who we hired a little under a year ago have really been working on sort of the next big infrastructure project that People4Bikes is going to steward. And there's a list of 1,000 projects of sort of the next and greatest bike infrastructure projects on road and off, which we'll be unveiling. There's model legislation, which our team has really been working on, how to pass mandated complete streets policies that are enforceable, and there are consequences for not accommodating all modes, how to get creative with infrastructure funding through climate and other buckets, how to really focus on street safety around intersection design, lower speed limits accompanied with design changes to make sure that drivers are actually going at a speed that's safe for all road users. So we're trying to approach this campaign from lots of angles, and it's launching in just a few weeks. So tune into that August webinar if you're able to hear more from our colleagues Dave and Martina, who've really been at the helm of that work. We'd love for you to be involved, because there'll be a lot of connecting with local groups legislatively on infrastructure projects to help this work sort of live in your community as well. So make sure you mark your calendar there. And the last thing I'll say before we turn to our Q&A, so again, do get those questions in, is, and we'll put some of these links in the chat now if we can, but certainly we'll send these out afterwards as well. Ashley mentioned our e-bike incentive toolkit, so I won't harp on that again, but it's a fantastic resource that we think is really helpful at a state or a city. There's a lot of legislation, lots of data and research, case studies, things like that. Two of our colleagues put together a 15-point advocacy playbook and fact sheet. And these is really succinct, data-driven responses to a lot of the common pushback we get when people talk about investing in bicycle infrastructure. And so that's a very readable, very usable document with current examples from a wide spread of places, not just sort of the big coastal cities that we often hear about doing innovative things here. So definitely take a look at that. They put it together just earlier this springtime. There's a link to sign up for our action alerts to make sure that you, when there is an opportunity on the ballot to write to a legislature happening near you, that you're in the know there. We know most folks in this call probably already are. That's how you got the email to come to this webinar, but forward this on to friends, coworkers, neighbors that also care about these things. We greatly appreciate it. I do want to do a quick industry invitation. If you're currently a coalition member and want to get more involved, or if you're a bike company listening in that's shop or company that's considering joining, a lot of the way that People4Bikes runs our legislative strategy is through industry subcommittees. We have one that's totally focused on e-bikes, doing a lot of the work you heard about this call, one that's totally focused on legislative and safety issues. There may even be an infrastructure working group starting in the next couple of months to really inform our organizational strategy from an industry lens. So these are volunteer. There's no additional cost to be on these subcommittees once you're a member. So write to Ashley and I. We'd be happy to connect you with our membership team or the subcommittee leads on staff. They meet normally once every month, sometimes every 2 months, but there's work happening all the time. They really shape our direction as an organization on this work. So if you want to get involved from an industry perspective, that's one of the best ways to do it. And then I already mentioned, keep a lookout in a few weeks for that August webinar invitation in your inboxes. Okay, well, thank you for listening to all of us. I know that was a lot and we danced around the whole country, lots of different topics. So thank you for your attention. I'll now open up the Q&A, and maybe Ashley, if you've already had a chance and there's a question at the top of your list, feel free, but I'll take a look now.
Yeah, so we got a lot of recreation, electric mountain bike questions. I can touch on a few of these here. So one individual asked about model legislation concerning electric mountain bike access. So we actually are coming out with a policy position and some language, sample language around it for e-bike access, going through a legislative route. Traditionally, we've been fairly involved in the rulemaking process as it relates to e-bikes on non-motorized natural surface trails, but we're seeing this a lot more now through a legislative avenue, which requires a lot of stakeholder collaboration and land manager collaboration. But be on the lookout. We'll do some announcements and emails about that, but definitely coming out with some model legislation around that soon. We're also coming out with some additional resources, and I'm just hinting because we'll have some celebrations later, but a more comprehensive overview of where e-bikes are allowed on non-motorized natural surface trails throughout the country. So that will be a really awesome tool, and we are very excited to release that in the coming months. Let me keep looking. Are you aware of any specific jurisdictions beyond NYC having e-bike certification laws on the docket? So we did hear recently about a certification law being proposed or closely thought about to be proposed in San Francisco. I don't have additional details aside from that right now, but just know that there is some talks in San Francisco, and of course we'll alert folks through our Action Alert program if there is an opportunity to take action. And of course, you're welcome to research it on your own. Let me.
Yeah, actually, while looking, I get done with a different one. We have a question from Ron. Do most states include all 3 classes in their e-bike incentive programs? It's a great question. Generally, yes. That's certainly the majority of states that we've seen. There are a couple, and I'm blanking on the specific ones right now, that have only allowed class 1 and class 2 in their incentive programs. We think it makes sense to include all 3. Obviously, the difference being in class 3 can go faster up to 20 miles an hour with the assist. And we think especially for statewide programs covering users in rural areas who may turn out of their driveway and be on a 45-mile-an-hour road, it makes sense to have the extra speed. So you're going at a more similar rate with cars, and there's less of a speed differential. So we think it makes sense to include all 3 classes, and most states have taken that approach as well, but not 100%.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about class 4 e-bikes. That's a fun one. So I'll say that PeopleForBikes, we do not define or accept class 4 e-bikes as a thing. I can drop it in the chat. We have a whole one pager on what we define as out of class electric vehicles, which is what if you're defining as a class 4 e-bike is something with a higher wattage than 750 watts, goes within that bucket of definition to us. So I'd be happy to drop that in the chat to provide some more information there. But we're very proud of our 3-class system, and anything that goes out of the 3-class system, we personally do not define as an electric bicycle. What else do we got?
There's one, Jordan, thank you for your questions. One around for EMTBs on trails. Are you seeing a trend toward trails parks permitting class 1 and excluding class 2 EMTBs? That's a great question. And if you want to follow up with us over email, I'll actually click to the next slide so everyone can take down our contact info. We'd be happy to connect you with our colleague, Rachel. She's done a lot of work on this. In general, PeopleForBikes does strongly advocate for class 1 EMTB access on natural surface trails. We still don't have a stance on class 2, so we're neither for nor against that yet, but Rachel's really in the nuance of that work. And I think she would probably say if she were here that the most of the conversations that she's been having, park managers and land managers are relatively friendly toward class 1, and I don't know what she'd say about the class 2 yet. So, but if you want to connect with us afterwards, we'd be happy to make the contact.
Awesome. We do have a question about right to repair. I don't want to go too much into the weeds of it, but I'll just say that we do have some fairly big safety concerns about it. I see your name that asked the question. If anyone else is interested also, but I'd be happy to send Jordan the letter we sent on testimony for right to repair, so you can have the whole technical list of the reasons why we believe e-bikes should be excluded. So we'd be happy to include that in our follow-up as well. Oh, we're getting a few more questions here.
Yeah, I see Jean or John. There's one about battery sort of can PeopleForBikes facilitate e-bike battery rebuild? program. As the batteries wear out, I think there's probably the spirit of the question is it'd be great to be able to just sort of fix it myself. And of course, that's what I was talking about with the right to repair. We, in general, even I'm sure you're a very skilled mechanic, but in general, we don't want everyone to be able to tinker with what could be a dangerous battery system. Your question also mentions too much trash. Otherwise, it's an absolutely great point. If people are getting a new battery each time their old one dies, PeopleForBikes has been behind the nationwide e-bike battery recycling program. And there's, God, it's something like almost 2,000 drop-off sites. I forget the exact number, but it's in the link that Ashley chatted earlier, and that we'll send afterwards as well. So if you live near one of those, or maybe the manufacturer, or sorry, the store that you buy from may be a pickup site, that is the best way we see right now to reduce this waste. And it's actually the first of any electrified transportation industry to have a standardized battery recycling program that this wide reaching. So we're really proud of it. And it's our effort to reduce the trash that you're mentioning.
And I want to underscore that once more. If you check out the Hungry for Batteries link that I chatted earlier and Kyler was just talking about, we got an awfully cute mascot. So if you're needing a pick-me-up today, he is adorable and his name is Watts and he's hungry for batteries. So it's a fun one. I see a question about stop as yield laws. If we track those, there is a law that passed in Minnesota for Idaho stop. If that is what you're alluding to, I can drop a link to that bill in the chat, but we track all laws across the country, anything that has to deal with bike sales, bike laws, safety laws, anything that has to deal with bike riding. So we have a pretty comprehensive tracking tool that allows us to see a bird's eye view of everything that's happening around the country and to the best of our efforts local level as well. And of course, we have our whole federal team in addition. We're a well-run government affairs team, but yes, we do track that. And if you'd like to email me, I'd be happy to send over our updated list of builds from this last session.
Mark, I see your question around, are there any studies where smaller, less than 10,000 population cities have advocated for bike and pedestrian expansion versus expanding lanes for cars? And feeling like lots of critical roads are state or county owned and sort of out of local control. I don't have the link handy right now, but we just a few weeks ago published our national city ratings launch. And this rates cities by their bike infrastructure quality, as well as sort of a community survey about how safe that infrastructure is perceived to be. And we separated out small, medium, large cities. I think the small counts as under 50K, but I'm sure there's a few that are under 10K, like you're mentioning. And these are basically like the best small cities for biking in the country. And we've written up case studies on some of them on sort of how it came to be, both policy-wise and culture-wise. So I can find that list if you want to shoot me an email. I'll follow up with you afterwards, or you can find it on our website. And I think that may be a good place to start about what are some of the smallest cities that are doing the most for bike infrastructure. And as you said, sort of what's the relate, and we can talk more about what's the relationship between their DOT and local control in that short list of places. So that could be a good place to look for some inspiration. All right. I realize, wow, you guys are so many questions. I know we're not going to get to all these in the next 1 minute. So please do follow up with us afterwards over email. Actually, anyone that you want to end on, or should we call it here?
I see one question about youth and e-bike ridership, and I'll just end it on with saying that, and we'll have future announcements of it, but we are working on an e-bike rider safety campaign that does have a youth component and information and resources for parents. It's something we've been working on for a long time and very excited to release that here soon. So just know that that's another campaign, something we definitely know is important and an issue area that is popping up across the country. So safety materials will be in your inbox soon.
Great. Okay. And with that, I know there are more questions. Thank you all. This is clearly a hot topic, and I think speaks for the need for state advocates to have a more regular forum to talk to each other and talk to people like PeopleForBikes that can bring sort of the newest research and national perspective. So thank you all for attending. And like I said, you'll get the recording as well as several of these notes and links a little bit later today. We'll send that out over email. And please do tune in August 15th, 11 o'clock Mountain Time for our more infrastructure campaign focused webinar. And with that, so grateful for your time and attention, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, Kyler.